Awesome. We are live. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this very special edition of Seven Figure Consultant Conversations, which is my LinkedIn Live show that sits alongside my podcast. And it also goes out on Facebook and on YouTube as well, so you can watch it from any of those corners. Now, Tiffany Neuman is my guest today. Tiffany has been a guest before on my podcast, where we had an awesome conversation, didn't we, Tiffany, about kind of legacy branding and what that means. And today we wanted to go a little bit deeper into that and to really talk about some of these branding issues as they kind of relate to women consultants. So if you're watching us live, do say hello, do drop your name and in the comments box. And if you have any questions, we would love to take those questions as we go through. So I think we should jump in, but I'd love to start with a bit of an introduction again, Tiffany, because people who've heard the podcast episode will already know you, but it would be great for anyone who's watching today or watching the replay who didn't catch that yet, to get to know you and know who you are and how you've come to be doing what you're doing. So I'm going to hand over to you, Tiffany. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thanks, first of all, Jessica, so much for having me. It's amazing to be back. And I've also enjoyed having you on my podcast. And so it's just been so wonderful to serve each other because our audiences are so aligned. And so I really work now with women entrepreneurs online in creating their personal brands, but I've been doing this work for almost 20 years. I went to college for branding and design. I was a professor for branding and design for many years, and I worked in the corporate world for over 15 years with brands like Burt's Bees, Adidas, Stoli Vodka, Chase Bank, all types of bigger brands. And then, like so many of us women, often have children. And I was like, this, even though it was my dream job and my passion to serve those big companies, I just no longer wanted to do that. And I wanted the freedom of being a consultant. So actually, I started out consulting, and then that turned into building an agency over time. And so now that's what I do is serve women consultants, coaches, health coaches, all types of online entrepreneurs in creating their personal brands.
Amazing. Thank you. And it's awesome hearing kind of how, I think so often as entrepreneurs, it's like you don't always know where the destination is going to be, but you kind of, you make a decision and you take a step forward and then everything kind of follows from there. And it's almost like we can't always predict the entire journey. But I don't know if you find this, but I definitely find that I look back 12 years and I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I made that tiny decision at that moment, not really knowing kind of what trajectory I was setting myself on. But it's all kind of each stage as it comes, isn't it? And it's only really when you look back that you can see what it's all added up to.
100%. I'm so glad as well. Even though it was so difficult at the time, sometimes it can be really difficult to make those decisions. But yeah, like you said, looking back, I'm so glad I did.
Yeah, definitely. And we were just talking before we went live. We've both had adventures in Europe this summer, haven't we? And actually, it's one of those things. Actually, Europe is very close. My flight to get to the south of France was an hour from the UK, but it's a bit more of an adventure to come from the States, isn't it? But actually, it's getting to a stage in business where you can step away and look what it opens the door to when you start to really embody that in your business. It doesn't just happen, does it? Being able to take time out of your business, it's something that we have to work towards really carefully. But actually, it's so worth making that investment in yourself, because I don't know about you, but I feel so reinvigorated having had some time just completely away from everything and breaking my schedule. I think there's also, I don't know, I know you went to Italy this summer. I don't know what your Italian is like, but my French isn't it's not amazing, but it's kind of there. So it's quite refreshing, just stepping into a different language, because it's none of the stuff is really sort of the same as at home, is it? Even earlier this year when I went to the States, I haven't actually traveled that extensively in the US, and I was just we kind of assume that it's the same because it's English speaking, but like it's not the same at all, is it? Like
It's so different.
but I think it's so good to like get out of your cultural sort of normative experience. I don't know
Mhm.
if you found that this summer as well, Tiffany.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and then even just because I went to Spain and then France and then Italy,
Oh, that's
so just
amazing.
seeing all of the different cultures and unplugging completely. My team was like, "It's okay, we got it." So I didn't even check my email. I didn't do anything, and it was a little bit scary at first, just like all things like that are, just like, is everybody going to be taken care of? Are the clients going to be? But yeah, ultimately just having that complete disconnection, but also just change of pace and different food, different culture was so worth every moment. And like you said, it's not like I haven't worked hard to get here, but it's so rewarding now to be able to take that into plan. Okay, every summer I'm going to take at least a month off and
Mm.
go do that. And I can build my life around that, which is
Yeah.
so amazing.
Well, and I think that the work is kind of, it's different, isn't it? So like when you first get started, like, and especially as a consultant, it's like all hands to the pump, like, let's go get some clients, let's go do some work, let's over deliver crazily so that everyone loves us forever. But
Mhm.
I think when you get to this stage of business, it's actually the business of becoming a CEO. And so it's more about
Absolutely.
like giving, like you actually need to create that space, don't you? Because if you're always rushing through everything, you can't make good long-term decisions.
Mhm.
So actually, good news, everyone. Like the best thing you can do for yourself is go on holiday or go on a
It's
retreat.
so true. I came back, like you were saying, so refreshed, and I mapped out like the next 5 years, all the things that have kind of been swirling in the back of my mind, like, "Ooh, maybe I should do this. Maybe I should do this." Like I was actually able
Mm,
to sit with it, and I wasn't working. It was just kind of like in my subconscious. And I was like,
yeah.
as soon as I came back, it just like all poured out of me. It was, yeah,
Yeah,
it's so
I, I
worth it.
I think it's really important actually. Like one of the things that I have sort of been learning about and like talking about a little bit is kind of this cycle of energy elements that we have as
Mm,
women, and like the
mhm.
way actually like each week we show up in a slightly different energy on this cycle. And I actually experienced this summer like going away on holiday. It put me into my air energy, which is like big ideas, space to just kind of like sit and like receive that download from the universe of like actually what am I called to do next, like what is my soul telling me that I really want to do. And
Mhm.
I really do think that the best way to find that air energy is to go on a retreat or go on holiday. I have a theory that like going on a plane puts you in air energy because
Yes.
you're in the air.
No, I 100% agree. Every time I love to fly for that reason. I always bring my journal, and it's like magic when you're in the air. I agree.
Mm. And so I
Amazing.
think it's really important actually to start taking stock of these things, isn't it? So that we're not just being like those worker bees who get everything done, but strategically we're nowhere and we're not really sure what we're aiming for. I think all of our options really shut down when we're in that mode. So
Mhm.
like just having some expansive time, like either over the summer, but you can create that expansiveness. Airports are open every day of the year. You can go anytime you want.
It's true, and I started not last year, the year before when we were in COVID and we couldn't really travel much, but I was like, "I have to do something because I love to travel," and so I was kind of going a little crazy, so I actually found some local Airbnbs that were still
Mm,
working, still up
yeah.
and running, and I just went and had a personal retreat, like, overnight. One
That's
time I did
amazing.
2 days, and I just said, "I love you, family, so much, but
I'm gonna
I
be
need
over
that
here.
space." So I
Yeah.
didn't fly anywhere, but just having that space and being in a different location made a
Mm,
huge difference for that. Like, if you can't take a whole month off, like, obviously, that was the first time I ever took that much time off. Actually, I took 2 months off, but that was for a different reason. Even a weekend, even 2 days can make a
mm.
huge difference, and
Yeah,
just getting out of your
absolutely.
normal space.
Yeah, it's so powerful, isn't it? So, yeah,
Mhm.
no, that wasn't exactly planned content, but I felt like it's a really important thing to be talking about because it's a big shift, isn't it? Like going from being the little worker bee to being like the CEO. Like it's a different kind of
Right.
working hard, isn't it? We've actually got to take a breath and get that expansiveness in order to do the job well. It's not just about putting in the time anymore.
Right, and one more thing I'll say too is I realized that I think so many of us as women, our worth is tied, like our value, we tie it to like working hard. If we're high achievers and we've been in corporate, we're consultants and we're used to that go, go, go mentality. That was like an eye-opening thing for me. It was actually not easy to slow down. I think most people would be like, oh, just take a month off. That sounds so amazing. Like there was days that I was like, what am I doing? This is hard. Cause I was so used to working, and I realized, wow, I was really tying a lot of my worth to working hard. And I also had like subconscious beliefs around equating working hard with the results that I was getting, which I know, like, especially in the early days, you have to put in the work. And sometimes working hard gives you the opposite effect when you just overwork and you can make yourself sick. So lots of ahas during that time too. It wasn't just all, fun. Most of it was fun, but it's good to like think through those things and why we do the things we do too.
Definitely. And like I actually said on my podcast episode that came out on Monday, one of the things I found really hard this summer was switching off. Like it took me probably the first week of my holiday to just be like, it's okay. Like, and it's not just work. Like I did, like, I'm not like an anxious traveler, but my anxiety does like spike when I'm away from home. And so it's like permission to relax. And I think we can fight it as well sometimes, can't we? Because often like the way that we do our businesses, it's a way of like managing some of these feelings, and particularly hypervigilance, which is something that I talked about in the podcast. We can get like all kinds of like kind of reassurances through the week by just constantly being on email or checking social media or kind of checking in with our team, and actually suddenly being in a situation where you're like, oh, none of those things are there.
Radio silence.
Like, I need to feel needed. But then, I think that is a really important thing, isn't it, in terms of being able to step away from that and know that like it might feel worse initially and you're like, oh gosh, I should never go on holiday because it's the worst thing. But actually that's really good for us because we are unlearning a lot of those things. If we never took the trip, we would never realize like our day-to-day dependencies.
So true.
And so actually that, again, it's all for your personal growth. You got to go on holiday, everyone. It has to be done.
Yes.
So our title for today is how to use your brand to elevate your income and influence. And I know that this is like your absolute zone of genius, isn't it, Tiffany?
Yes.
So like I would love to open up that whole discussion, because brand is one of those things we all know that we need to have one, but we don't always know like why we need to have it.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked a lot, didn't we, like when you came on my podcast, about kind of the importance of a legacy brand, and not just branding like who you are in this second, but almost like taking the big picture view and branding for like your 10-year plan rather
Absolutely.
than like your 6-month plan. But I feel like a question that people often have when I speak to them is kind of like, well, how do I know like what colors I'm supposed to have? And like, I don't want to go for like the wrong sort of color psychology.
Mm-hmm.
But would you like, what would you say in terms of like how you can start to position your brand and yourself as like a thought leader? What kind of things go into that thought process, would you say, from like a branding point of view?
Yeah, well, there's so much. And the first thing I love that you said about the colors, because that's when people usually come to me too, is I just don't know what colors to use, or, my website's outdated and I know it needs a refresh, like what would you suggest? And those things are all important because obviously we're visual creatures, and, we have 7 seconds to stop people on social media, but there's so much noise. So really the visuals, and this probably sounds crazy coming from a brand expert, but they don't really matter as much as we think they do. So when we think of a brand, we think of the visuals, and that is important. But what most people make the mistake of is only focusing on the visuals. Okay, I'm going to make a pretty logo, get some pretty colors, make it look beautiful, but they don't do that deep work in the brand that actually is doing all the heavy lifting. So I always use the iceberg analogy. I might have said this on the podcast too. So if you listen to Jessica's podcast, this might be double, but it's worth repeating.
Sometimes you need to hear it more than once for it to really embed.
What we see above the surface, again, is all the visuals. what's below the surface is what's really important. So this is your vision, because how do you know where you're heading in the business? You want to reverse engineer your brand from that vision, your values, your voice, your mission statement, your brand story, which is probably the biggest piece of your brand overall, is the brand story. So all of those things you really want to think about rather than just the visuals. And then once you create that foundation and you have it really solid and you can show up and speak your truth around who you're serving, what you're doing. I get so many people that don't know like what to call themselves. You know, am I a coach? Am I a consultant? Am I this or that? So that's a really big piece of it. Just getting all of those content pieces down first is really how you start creating a personal brand and talking about what you believe in. And this can even go for people in corporate. So say you're in corporate and you're not a consultant yet, but you've been thinking about it. You can start your personal brand. In fact, you already have a personal brand. Everybody has one, because when you put yourself out there on social media, that's unconsciously a brand. People start perceiving you in a specific way. So the more intentional you are about it, so the more you start to think, and it's not being contriving, you still want to be authentic, you want to be yourself, but you really want to think about, well, who am I? What do I stand for? How do I want people to perceive me? What do I want to be known for? Those types of things. And really start being a little bit more strategic about how you're putting yourself out there. Then that's really creates that foundation. So then people start to see you as a thought leader and they're like, oh, well, Jessica works with women consultants. You know, she is the 7-figure consultant. So it gets very clear when you have that messaging in place. For me, it's the legacy brands. So
it's like, what's the thing that people associate? Like, what are the things that come to mind? And the things that they might either start to be like, oh, if I need help with this, I should go to this person. Or like they meet someone and they're like, oh, you should speak to Jessica, you should speak to Tiffany, that kind of
thing. It's where you start getting that name recognition, where when people say consultant, they think of Jessica. When they think of branding, it's Tiffany, because they see you in their feeds, they get your emails, your podcasts, and eventually, and it's always that know, like, trust factor too. And it helps you stand out among the noise too when you are really clear. So,
and I guess as well, like, I feel like the next logical step is that it starts to inform your content, doesn't it, at that high level? Because people often say like, oh, what should I be writing about? Like, and I think I see a lot of content on LinkedIn in particular, and I'm just like, I don't know that you've thought through like what you need your content to do for you, because when you get it right, and it's not easy to do, but it's easier when you understand like what your brand values are.
Oh my gosh.
Like you start to have every piece of content is actually doing a job for you, rather than just like, here's a really embarrassing overshare that now no one is going to want to come near you.
Exactly. We even talk about your brand story and your personal stories, because your personal stories that you share, like some people do overshare, and it's honestly repelling for your brand. So you want to be strategic, and it's not like you're hiding or lying about things, but there's just certain things that not everybody needs to know. But then there's really vulnerable things that you do want to share that reflect your brand. I mean, we're not perfect people. So sharing both the good and the bad is key. Sharing wins and losses and all of those things. But you don't have to share every little piece of your story necessarily, or every little thing that's happening in your life. And I think that's a misconception when we talk about like vulnerability.
It doesn't mean like share that, because some people do this like, here's the most awful thing I ever did, or like the most awful thing that ever happened to me. And it's like, if that's not resonating with your audience, then that is not the right kind of vulnerability. That's just like, oh my gosh, I can't look away, but please stop. But I think that's why it can be such a helpful thing. Now, you've talked about several things in terms of like your brand values and like, a lot of the sort of building blocks that go into that. If people are listening and they're like, I literally have no idea what that means, I'm kind of guessing that that's not a deal breaker for you. In fact, that's part of the work that you will actually do with your clients. Like you don't need to be like, oh, hey, Tiffany, I've got everything worked out. Like, help me do a color scheme. It's kind of the opposite to that, right?
Totally the opposite. I get so many people who come and they're just like, I know I need a brand, Well, and a lot of times people don't know they need a brand until they get to a certain point. And then they, hear Gary Vaynerchuk or, somebody randomly, Marie Forleo, talking about that your brand is your most valuable commodity as a business owner because it's what you own. If you look at the big brands like Oprah, she has a brand. All the people we, follow online, they become so popular usually because they have a really strategic brand and because of who they are, of course. So not everybody is going to follow everybody, and that's okay. You might not like everybody, and that's the point too, because you'll attracts likes. You're going to attract the people that are similar to you and share your values, but that's why you want to get clear on all of that. So that's really the foundational pieces of what I teach and what I help people walking through is how do you step by step through all those elements and create a cohesive brand foundation. So I usually help people walk away with actually a brand manual. It's like a 30-page document. I call it their brand Bible with everything in it. So they can just hand it to their team or hand it to a social media person and be like, okay, here's the brand. Now like run with it. So it makes everything in life a lot easier in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd be really interested to know because I think sometimes we see these like big brands, and you've mentioned a few that you've worked with, but like, I guess what I want to ask is like, those brands can seem really kind of put together, really like they're doing everything 100% the way they should be, and everything is all going the way that it needs to. But I'm kind of guessing with what I know of what organizations tend to be like behind the scenes, you can actually have a very successful brand that is still a work in progress. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. That's such a good question. I don't think I've ever been asked that before. Well, and that's
I just
why
always like to know what's going on behind the scenes with
yeah.
these things. Everything always looks so impressive, but it's not always the case. That even in big, like massive organizations, things can sometimes
And
be
there's
such a mess.
failed launches, just like with entrepreneurship, there's failed, products lines that come out. But like say for Adidas, for instance, like they had what I consider a legacy brand when I came on, to work with them. And so it wasn't so much about like rebranding or creating the brand. It's like creating a brand within a brand when you get to the big corporations. And it's really all about those sections. So if there's a new shoe coming out, or like Burt's Bees, we did a whole new lip gloss line. So then it really becomes about a brand within a brand, and that becomes a new launch. But you still have to follow all the old brand guidelines. So it almost becomes, I don't want to say more difficult. They have a branded system in place, so you have guidelines to follow, but you also can't break the rules necessarily too much. So it's actually a really fun challenge in corporate behind the scenes. But there's also a lot of personalities to deal with and other things. So I think that's another reason I do love working with entrepreneurs, because you get visionaries and the sky's kind of the limit of where you can go, where in corporate, it was really amazing. And I learned so much from working with big brands, but there's a lot more like constrictions to what you're doing.
Yeah, I can totally imagine that. And do you tend to see similar things on a smaller scale, I guess, like with some of the entrepreneurs and consultants that you work with, like where they're like, oh, I've got this like new idea, and it goes against all of the like guidelines and structures that you've put in place with the branding. Like how do you get around that? Is that a case of like they need to update the brand, or is that a case of you can't do that?
You have the best questions. That can be either way. So there's definitely a thing with entrepreneurs, because we love new ideas. And I tell people, like, you need to just stop playing in Canva. I know it's fun. I know it's like great and so much fun, but to have a solid brand, you have to have consistency. Like Target's never going to change their red, Levi's is never going to change. Like now they have evolved over the years. If you look at like a Levi's logo, and you can see that that's evolved over time. So it does give you space to reinvent the wheel, update with the times, and evolve. So your brand isn't always set in stone. And that's the point of a legacy brand, is so you can evolve and you can change. So you really want to think about it more as campaigns. So You can have new campaigns, and think about it, you can have some fun in your marketing. So maybe you get new photos taken, or you do something kind of fun and crazy. But the solid pieces like your vision, values, voice, the colors that you're using, all of that really needs to stay consistent so people recognize you and they don't
Yeah.
get confused. Because if you change things all the time, people are going to be like, wait, I thought Jessica was this, but now she's this, and
Yeah.
whatever. And then for that reason, there is, so an example of that, like my client Selena Sue, we would do a new campaign for her launch every year. She had one yearly launch. It was really fun. We would kind of change the look and feel just to have something new and fresh for her, but also for the audience. Then there's an example of my client Amanda Walker, who was a health coach, and her brand was Feel Amazing Naked. We made this beautiful website 4 years ago, I think. And then she evolved as an entrepreneur, as a person, and she realized that she actually wanted to coach women to be better coaches. And so that actually required a brand refresh because she was talking to a slightly different target audience. She was no longer doing health coaching, so her brand story changed. However, the foundations were still the same. Her values didn't change. The vision changed slightly, but not really. She still wanted the same things. So it was really cool to watch her say, like, actually, there's not a lot I have to change. We just had to revisit certain elements. So we just rebranded it from Feel Amazing Naked to Best Damn Coach, and then got a new photo shoot. And we were able to turn and refresh her brand within like a month and, like really quickly redo the whole website. So there's kind of different instances.
Yeah, no, I love that because I think that's the thing. Sometimes people will be like, oh, I've got this spark of an idea for something that I want to do kind of next in my business. And sometimes that's like in keeping with what the business has been, but sometimes it is like something completely fresh. But this is why I love kind of sending people your way, Tiffany, because I start being like, oh, I don't know. Whereas seeing it all from a branding
It's
point of
always
view.
case by case
Yeah, and
basis in
it
that
depends like what
respect.
assets they've built up as well, because sometimes that might be a similar audience, or it might be an audience where like actually it looks different, like the description is completely different, but people who wanted that are likely to have evolved too and be ready to go with you. So I guess
Yeah.
there's a lot of different things to
Yeah,
consider.
or people jump too soon and they're like, "Oh, this new thing, I'm gonna kind of give away, like, stop doing that, do all this new stuff," and then they get in it and realize, "Oh, I don't really love that." And then they wanna go back, and that really confuses the audience. So really, if you get a new idea, it's so good to test it first and make sure that's the direction before you
Definitely.
completely.
Well, because our gut instinct, and I've found this with my own business, but it happens a lot in conversations with clients at all levels. We often have a gut feeling on where the value in our business lies. And then when you
Mhm.
look at the data, you're like, oh, I didn't realize that this thing that I'm doing that I'm barely giving any thought to is actually the major driver of all of the revenue that comes through.
Ooh,
So
yeah.
we don't always have we can sometimes have a gut feel, and it can be the thing that like our heart loves the most. But the thing that is actually moving the needle for us the most, if you inadvertently sort of get rid of that, then you can end up being like, oh, I've got this whole new look and everything, and like there's no one here.
Yes, and then that's brings me to another point where people often brand, like, every offer
Mm,
completely, like, "Well, here's this offer, and it's gonna look like this, and this offer looks like this," but then you get on social media, and it's, like, all disjointed, so rather than doing that, if you wanted to have a new offer, great. What we do is create branded systems, so if like I have legacy brand foundations, legacy brand transformation, legacy brand elevation. Those are like the programs that I have.
mm,
If I wanted to do another one, like, okay, we know what that's going to look like. We know what it's going to sound like. Maybe they have all different colors. So it's really important when you're building the brand or like refreshing the brand, rebranding, to think about it that way rather than go and be like, oh, this needs a whole new brand for this new offer. It actually is better for you and
mm.
for your audience to understand that it's still you, and for you to just have ease in your life and not
Yeah.
have to try and reinvent
Well,
everything.
I think that's a really good point, because I know like at one point I had different offers that they looked completely different, and if you put them all together on the same screen, it was like, oh my gosh, my eyes can't cope with this. But then what we actually did is we refreshed everything, but we
Mhm.
made it so that like we used the same overall color palette, but we focused on a different corner of it for like each offer. So it was kind of,
Right.
and we used like different images, but from the same collection. So it was starting to get that feeling of like, this is all like, this is the same.
Cohesive.
Yeah, this is the same brand, but it's just different levels that people can come in at. And it was such a relief to me, like when we did that, because I'd just been kind of looking at everything being like, oh gosh, like it's all gone off in all these different angles, and like, how do we bring it together? But actually looking at the brand is a really good way to start to understand how you can capture all these different offers that you might have. Because I think the more established you get, sometimes it's just a case of like drilling deeper into the thing that you do and actually going higher level with it. But I think sometimes we can end up in a situation where we have almost like different sub audiences for different things that we do. And actually it's not the case that then you're like, oh no, everything's broken, like scrap it all and start again. Like actually you can find ways within the same brand of actually capturing some of that nuance, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of my favorite ways to work with people. I love creating brands from scratch, but I also love going into brands that are what I like to call disjointed, or like a Frankenstein brand, because as entrepreneurs, we build the plane as we fly it a lot of the times. You know, we start our businesses and we're like, oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And then, like you said, one day you wake up and you're like, oh, I made a little bit of a mess. But that's normal, you
And
know.
we don't always know what's going to take off either, do we? Sometimes you feel really strong about something. And then actually it tests really poorly and you're like, oh, well, I've kind of forgotten about that now and I'm on to the next thing. But like some things, they do end up being a really prominent part of your business. And you're like, oh, I kind of didn't give any thought to the brand for that. It just took off by itself and probably needs to look a bit better than it does.
Exactly.
So
fun.
What would you say, like in terms of like when people come and work with you, like what are some of the things that they are saying about kind of where their brand has got to and some of the problems? We've touched on a few things, but I like, what kind of pain points are they having or are they experiencing?
Yeah, a lot of times, most of the time they come for the visuals first, and then I educate them that they need to do the deeper work about finding themselves, who they are in the brand, because then their brand can last forever. And really, a lot of times people come and they're like, you know, I spent, you know, 5 figures on my brand and I did the branding thing, but I just never really loved it. Or they'll say, you know, my website's 5 years old. It kind of looks outdated. I need to update it. Or I never really liked my logo, or I don't have a logo. So a lot of the times it really is the visuals that they come for, unless they hear me talking on the podcast or something. And then they say, or the disjointed piece, you know, like the brand's kind of messy, or I don't even have a brand. I want to start out really fresh. Sometimes I'll get women that are exiting corporate and they're already an expert in what they're doing and they want to look put together right away, you know, heading out there. Or they've heard me speaking, or they've done their research and they're like, okay, I know I need my brand values, my vision, my voice. I know I need to put together a brand story. I just have no idea how to go about doing that. I need somebody to guide me. And that's oftentimes what it is too, because they'll hear it on somebody else's podcast, or they'll hear, you know, somebody talking about a book about, you know, their brand story. And they're like, okay, well, I have no idea what that is. And so often they'll get bits and pieces of it. So they may have a mission statement, or they, you know, they may have done a vision workshop, but they don't have the full piece together. And so that's a lot of the times where people will come and be like, okay, I need help. I don't understand this.
And do you like it? Well, do you like it when people rock up and they're like, I don't know anything about branding, but I've heard you talk and like, brand me?
Yes, absolutely. Because I think it's just like, if I was to go try to do, I've never done Facebook advertising before. I've never really needed to, but if I was to go and try and do that right now, it'd be the same thing. I'm like, I know it could grow my audience. You know, I haven't needed it so far, but all of these things, I'm not an expert. I would have no idea where to begin. And I know it would take so much more of my time and effort than just hiring somebody and saying like, okay, make it happen. Let's do it the right way from the beginning.
Well, again, it's a CEO thing, isn't it? Because if you're kind of having to learn everything there is to know about branding, like how can you capture 20 years of experience by reading a book or listening to a podcast episode? Actually, like there's a book actually that I've been recommending to all of my clients called Who Not How, and
I haven't heard of that one.
The ethos. Let me see. Do I have it to hand on my shelf? Hold on. There. This book,
Ooh,
which
who, not
it's
how.
it's a
Okay.
really good read. It's not like overly long. But the thing about that is that like stop trying to become the expert. Instead, like get an expert to come and do it for you properly. Because often, you know, and it's that kind of bootstrapping that we get pulled into in the early days for business when like maybe it's still in testing mode and you haven't figured out, is there
Mhm.
revenue? Does it make sense to invest this much money in doing this? But at the level that I work with my clients, and I know that you do with yours as well, Tiffany, it's like there's a lot at stake actually. So doing it by yourself when you're not a branding expert and you don't really have the time and you
Oh
don't
my
really have the
gosh.
headspace, it's so much better to actually get someone else so that you can be the CEO and coordinate like the, you know, and be involved through that work, but not be the strategic lead on something you're not an expert in.
Oh, 100%. If I could go back now and do that and just, like I remember my first hire in my team too. It was just like, oh my gosh, and I'm going to be spending all this money. And then now that I have a full team, I'm like, oh, I should have done this so much earlier because it just frees up
Yeah.
your capacity to serve your clients better and do everything. So same thing with hiring experts, even if they're not on your team, but they're going to be coming in to support you.
Mm.
Yeah, it just allows you to grow so much quicker.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we do feel like, oh, hey, I'm doing a responsible thing. I'm saving the money. I'm doing it myself. Like, or I'm bringing someone in, but I'm like making sure that like they're following my lead, not the other way around. I think these are red flags, aren't they? For like when we're not using our budget responsibly, and actually, it's one of those things you have to unlearn, don't you? Because as like startup entrepreneurs, we like to be really self sufficient, and it's like, right, got to go and find out what marketing is so I can do some of that. Whereas this is a completely different stage of business where actually bring in the expert and then let them do their thing. Don't kind of
Right.
try and micromanage or like take the lead on something that you don't have the expertise actually to actually drive.
100%. It'll make your life so much easier. So good.
Amazing. Well, one other thing that I wanted to ask you, and again, I don't know if these are all coming out of left field today, but you know that feeling when like you work with someone or an agency and they're like, and here's your new brand, ta-da, and you look at it and
Mhm.
you're like, I don't know why, but I do not love this. Like, what would you say are really good things that you can do to avoid that happening?
Mm.
Because that's not a good situation. But I don't know if you find this. I've found this whenever it's something to do with design. I lack the vocabulary to be able to describe in designer terms like what is really wrong. So I'll be like, oh, I don't know why, but like the feel of this is like, oh, and you
Not
know,
it.
you use words that aren't really words. Like, do you have any advice for people who are, you know, looking at their brand and thinking, this would be a really good thing to invest in, but like how can they productively push forward so that they get a really good like outcome? Because when you see it like a really exciting brand and it takes your
Mhm.
breath away and you're just like, oh, I don't know how you did this, but this is exactly what was inside of my head that I didn't have the words to tell you like what it looked
What
like,
it
but this
is.
is what it looked like. Do you have any advice for us on that front?
Yes, because this is so common too. And it is a process. So that's where like you want to work with somebody, a designer, whether it's an agency or a singular designer that first of all, that doesn't necessarily have their own style, but they create off of the essence of the person, or you really love their style, that's fine too. The problem if you see a portfolio and all of the styles look the same, even if you love it, then you're going to end up looking just kind of like everybody else.
So if you want
And
to
if
be on
you're
that
okay with
train,
it,
then
that's
that's kind of
fine.
good. But if you don't, then it's like, don't use that designer.
Right. So one of my favorite things to say is like when you look at their portfolio, does everything look the same or does it look like they captured that person? And that's
Mm,
always the goal that we have, is to make sure that we're capturing that person's essence truly, because that's what it's all about. They're not going to resonate it if it's not capturing their essence. And that's why that deep work. If you just go grab a logo and some fonts and some colors, you may
mm,
end up loving it. It does happen. However, once a brand strategist gets to know you by doing the deep work and understands your brand story, understands really truly gets you at your core and your essence, that's when the magic will happen. And so oftentimes, if you're just filling out a questionnaire and then you get turned back a brand and this is it, that's why there's not this connection. But when you do the deep work along with somebody, it's really a co-creation process. And when they really get to know you, like I get to know my clients, then, I mean, it's literally like magical sometimes where one or the other person will get like downloads of like, oh my gosh, well, what if we did that? And what if we did that? It's a co-creation process. So the ideas kind of formulate together and then it comes out. And now maybe the first time, and we'll do like 20 logo options the first time. And they'll be like, oh my gosh, like I love this one. I like this one, but neither of them are quite right. Well, what if we put those two together? And then it's like, oh my gosh, that's it. So it is a process. Like sometimes it's always not, I'll just be very honest. Sometimes people are like, oh my God, that's it. I love it. And then sometimes people are like, gosh, it's so close, but it's still not there. And then we, fine tune. So you also want to get somebody that provides options and then also is open to refine them, not just like, here it is.
Ta-da, the end. Yeah.
Which is also why, when you're first starting out, go ahead, go get a logo off Fiverr. If it looks good to you, do it. But once you've established your business and you really want a brand that's going to last, make sure that you're investing for it, because that's going to be something that's going to stick with you and you want to love it. You want to be proud of it. You want to have people go to your website and be like, oh my gosh, like feel excited about sharing it, not like, here's my website,
Yeah, definitely. And it sounds like kind of not skimping on deep work, because I think sometimes people can be a bit like, eye roll. I don't want to talk about my ideal client again. Like, I don't know.
No,
I get it. That is, it can lead to you sort of missing the nuance and I guess coming across as a bit beige. Like clients quite often say to me like, oh, will you look at my website? What do you think? And I'm always like, this is not like what I do. So I can give you like a sort of, this is my opinion, but it's not like, oh, I'm the expert of how to do websites. But I think it's when you read something and you're like, I've read the words and I still don't really know like what you do or what this means. I think there are really kind of small things that can make a really big difference in terms of conveying meaning. And isn't it fascinating? Because like it's not just the words, it's not just the pictures, it's kind of both. And the two need to come, like they need to be speaking the same language. Otherwise that can create sort of dissonance in the way that the audience is perceiving your brand, because they're like the colors say to me this and the words say to me this. And like those things don't go together. Like, who are you?
Yeah, 100%. And that's where I know people are like, oh, I've done some of this work before and I've done it. Well, the reason that you're probably not getting the results is you haven't like done the work. Like we were talking about the vacations. Sometimes you need to slow down to speed up. And when people say like, oh my gosh, your process is like 3 months. Yeah, it's 3 months, but it's 3 months going to last you like the rest of your business life. And to slow down, to do it right, and to do it one time really well, that'll last forever. Like, why wouldn't you? It's not something that you want to slap together. And it's also a self-development process. I know they say that about entrepreneurship. It's the deepest self-development process. People literally say that the process changes their life, because not only are they uncovering their business brand, it's your personal brand and it's you. And oftentimes as women, we go through corporate, we have children, we kind of lose a little bit of our identity over time. I know I did. And when I was doing my own brand, I was like, I don't even know who I am anymore. Like it took me a while to figure that out. So if you just slap things together again, it's not going to have that deep impact. But if you take the time and you have these aha moments and you get that clarity, then that's when it all really comes together and it's cohesive, like you said, and you can land on somebody's site and you're like, oh my gosh, this is it, you know?
And I guess sometimes we end up a bit beige with our branding because we're like, oh, I don't want to be too much. Like nearly everyone who works with me has said it one time or other. Like, I need to tone this down because that person once said to me, I'm too much. And people have said that to me a ton. And I'm always like, I know. But like, it's quite an art, isn't it? Like showing enough of your true self. And I completely resonate with what you're saying, Tiffany, about kind of sometimes we've put ourselves on the back burner for so long, or like our default thing is like, oh, like, who do you need me to be? Like we can go through our whole careers sort of like hiding parts of ourselves and like not showing up because it's not appropriate for the workplace or not considered to be appropriate for the workplace.
Right.
But even kind of, you know, at home, I think sometimes children need us to be like snack providers and like, I don't know, sometimes my kids will go through a phase where all they want to do is like draw. So it's like, Mummy, can I have some paper? Mummy, where are my pens? You know, all this kind of stuff. Whereas sometimes we're needed to be in a completely different energy if they need a lot more emotional support, or if they're going through stuff and we need to be showing them how to have conversations about feelings. But it can lead us like with this feeling of like, I don't really know who I am because I'm in so many different contexts where people need me to be a certain way. So I completely agree with you. To go deep is really important. And that takes time. Like we don't all get our calling downloaded in a single day. Sometimes there's like, and often the women that I work with, they come to me with this tiny little spark of like, I think that I might, oh, sorry, I've lost my, there we go. I think I might have like a bit of a, you know, an idea that I could be a thought leader, or I think I might be able to do this kind of consulting, or I think I might be able to do coaching as well as consulting. And it's something that is, it's just kind of in its infancy, and it's an idea that we're working on, but like, are they ready in that moment to like go out in the world and be like, everyone, this is what I do now? Like it's exactly what you're saying from before about like, sometimes we need to test things and we need to sit with them and we need to make sure that actually this is something that resonates, not just in the moment that you thought of it, but like for the long term, because it's that self-knowledge, isn't it? And that self-understanding. Like sometimes we can, and I think this does happen to us a lot as women, we can perceive that we're needed to be a certain way. And so we experiment with being a bit more like that. But actually over time, we're like, that's exhausting because I can do that, but that's not my natural self. So I think these are long-term sort of deep level questions, aren't they? That we can't we shouldn't expect to just bash out in a single day, maybe.
Right. And it goes both ways. We often tone ourselves down from many various reasons, or the opposite is true. Like I had one client who came to me and her brand was like baby blue and baby pink, like literally like nursery colors. But she was like on fire and like over, you know, just so like over the top. But that's really who she was. And I was like, there is a huge disconnect. Well, we stemmed it back to her parents used to tell her to be quiet all the time, right? So it didn't even come from corporate or that. It came from her childhood.
Yeah.
And then on the opposite spectrum, I usually work with women, but I was working with a man and he was from, where was he from? I'm trying to remember because I think it was the Netherlands. Somewhere over there. I work with so many international clients. I kind of forgot where he was from. But anyways, he had the opposite. He was very introverted, quite quiet, but he is a genius at marketing. But he saw all the Americans and everybody who was very loud and out there. So he thought he needed to be that way. And so he'd get on, you know, lives and be all crazy and post things. And like you said, it was exhausting him. He was so out of alignment. He actually got sick and had to
that's
like
so common actually
retreat for a while because he was putting out all this energy that wasn't him. So I think you nailed it, is it's on top of how you're going to say it, who you're going to say. It's like, you really need to sit with it and figure out who you are and be okay with that. Like we're all here for a reason. My professor comes out and I start teaching and I'm like, I probably sound so boring, but that's part of who I am. Like I can't help it. I am not the crazy out there person. And so I'm not going to try and be. I like to have fun, but I'm not all over the place.
I'm kind of like that too. And people have often said to me, like, when you start talking, we know that you mean business. And it's like, it's not always bad to be serious. And like, I think I felt that pressure early on in my business to be like this super extrovert. Like, you know, I had a few coaches and did a few courses and they were like, yeah, so like go on Facebook Live every day for an hour. And it's like, I would die if I tried to do that. And it's knowing like what our strengths are, because it's not like, I think this is something that is changing in the world more broadly, isn't it? Like, I think I grew up feeling as an introvert, like if I want to be successful in the world, I need to be different to what I actually am.
Yes.
Whereas we are starting as a kind of Western civilization, I think, to get such more of an appreciation for introverts and know that actually there are ways in which introverts can be really better actually in situations than like a really extroverted person. I don't know, the example I always like to use is that my extrovert husband had a really hard time in lockdown because he was like, I need my people. Whereas I was like living my best life because I was just like, I'm completely like self-contained. This is wonderful. But like all of that is to say, I really agree with you there, Tiffany. I think that self-acceptance is such an important part of the journey. Getting to a point where actually you can make your brand reflect your true self and start to, because it can feel very costly, can't it, to reveal certain things about ourselves, and they're not like usually salacious or like particularly outrageous, but it's just like I've never really been allowed to talk. Like for me, I said on a podcast that I did last week, I'm probably a bit of a punk rocker actually, and like the host of the podcast, she was totally on that same wavelength, and we had a lot of fun talking about it. But like there are certain things that we can be like, oh, I don't know if I'm allowed to like those kinds of things. But actually it's so liberating when you get the understanding of what your brand actually is and what people who want to buy from you are like, because then it means that you can show them all the ways that you share those interests and those preferences.
Yeah, and I always say you can't see the label from inside the bottle, which oftentimes, because we've been in our own bodies and our own skin for so long, we've been through so many things, it's so easy to overthink or overanalyze or keep mulling over, who I am, how this is. And so that's kind of what I feel like is my role, is to create a container and to create a space for that to like truly come out. So asking the right questions and having people do exercises. So I'm not force feeding them who I think they are, but it's organically coming out of them without them really even realizing it.
Yeah, they may not have understood what it adds up to, like visually or for a brand, or like even I imagine they get in situations where they're like, oh, I'd never put that together before, but it makes perfect sense. It's really like a clarity exercise.
Totally. That leads to another one of my favorite sayings, which is clarity doesn't strike, it unfolds. Like a lot of times, sometimes we do have those moments of things strike us. We're like, oh my gosh. But in the brand, I like to say it's not just like this one and done moment. There's a lot of these ahas that keep adding up, and then like the big picture unfolds, which is so awesome to like experience with people.
Absolutely. Oh, well, Tiffany, we're running out of time. I've loved our conversation today, and I knew
I could talk to you for hours, as always.
Exactly. And I love that we've had a bit more time to stretch our legs with this topic, and we've been able to go deep into it, because we want to talk about like real things that, we're all entrepreneurs. We're all doing this together. Like there are some things that like people talk about a lot and you're like, that just isn't really that relevant. Whereas like my vision for this whole kind of series that we're doing on LinkedIn Live is to talk about the stuff that you really need to know. So thank you for everything that you've shared with us today, because I feel like we've really kind of like demystified some of this stuff and been able to
thank you for your amazing questions. They were so good.
Oh, you're so welcome. Now, I know you have a special workshop coming up. Like, tell us about that.
Yes, absolutely. So it's the Brand Clarity Workshop, because as we talked about, that's the thing that people struggle with most, is getting that clarity. And so it's next week, September 14th and 16th. We have 2 different times, just because I do work with people all over the globe, so it allows for different time zones. So I think it's like 6 p.m. and 11 a.m. Eastern time, which it allows for everybody. So
people can adjust to what their time zone is.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a 2-hour workshop. And when I say workshop, I truly do mean that. I will be teaching for part of it, but then we're also going to do some exercises. So my goal is for everybody to walk away, not with the full clarity, because like I said, that takes time, but with the first steps of really understanding where their vision lies and where they want to take their brand and business and how to get there, like the exact steps to get there. So we'll be working kind of hand in hand and doing some exercises as well.
Amazing. And what we can do is drop the link so people can register for that. We'll drop it in, like when we finished, we'll go and put it in the comments to the video so people can see where they can sign up. Is there like a short and snappy URL that you have, or is it quite a long one, Tiffany?
It's fairly short. It's Your Legacy Brand and Brand Clarity Workshop, but it'll still be good to drop it in there.
Yeah, so people can see that. Well,
yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being my guest today. And thank you to everyone who has listened while we've been going through. It's been great to share these things with you, and I hope that you found it helpful. And I will see you guys again soon.